can we just transition quickly? I said there's some carryover. Purdue and Louisville. Obviously, Jeff Brom leaves Purdue. Ryan Walters is going to take over. And not just a shift in head coach, but a shift in philosophy, a completely different look because he's a defensive-minded guy. He's a defensive coordinator that's now flipped. 8-6. I mentioned they got blown out by Michigan. They got blown out by LSU in the bowl game, 63-7. You know, it's a program. You can go back to Joe Tiller, had a little success, but not a ton. Also, remember last year, it's not just Purdue getting blown out in the Big Ten championship game and then in the bowl game, but their basketball team lost to Farley Dickinson. Yeah. So it's interesting. Hudson Card comes in from Texas, the transfer to play quarterback, but this is going to be an interesting uphill battle in year one from Ryan Walters at Purdue.
Well, remember, he had one of the top defenses in the nation last year at Illinois. He was a 2-year defensive coordinator there under Brett Bielema, did a tremendous job. This was the team that had the best defense in the Big Ten last year. Purdue's calling card, when you go back to Joe Tiller, going forward with Drew Brees and company, and then some of the other players that have come through there, has generally been on the offensive side of the ball, Patrick. This team needs to improve defensively. I think that's an area where they've always been deficient, and I think that's where Walters is going to really improve this team, is on that side of the football. If they can do that, remember, he played football at Colorado. He was a safety. So I think this should help because that's the one area they've always been void. And you mentioned Hudson Card coming in. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I think he's a pretty decent guy. I'll tell you right now, I'd rather have him than Jake Plummer, at least.
No, I totally agree.
Right?
I was going to say the exact same thing. Go ahead. But Hudson Card, when I did see a little bit of him at Texas, I like the player.
Absolutely. The problem at Texas is you're expected to have a Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning type of quarterback. And Hudson Card was a decent quarterback. And you know what? Purdue's a great landing spot for him. I think he could be very effective and get this Boilermakers team going in the right direction. Again, another program with transfers coming in, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But to me, I like this team going forward in terms of what they're capable of. This is a middle-of-the-pack type of team in the Big Ten. They're not a team that you expect to win 8 or 9 games, but a bowl season is pretty effective. If the Boilers can do that, Patrick, I think it would be a good overall success and good start for Ryan Walters. But the one thing I expect to see and would look for in Purdue games this year until we get an adjustment on the totals is maybe playing some Purdue games under. Defensively, I think they're going to be far better. Walters is going to have an immediate impact. I got to tell you, if you watched Illinois last year, if they had a pulse of consistency on offense, they would have been an upper echelon team. How he got those guys to play that well defensively is still mind-boggling to me.
Yes, 17-10 their last 2 years. Purdue is coming off their first Big Ten West Division title. They've made bowl trips the last 2 years. It's going to be an adjustment from Brom to Walters. You know, transforming a team in Purdue from an offensive team under Brom to a defensive team. You mentioned defensively. I wrote down a lot of work to do. They got D-line transfers expected to start from Vandy, Arkansas, and Auburn. New faces, new places. They do have 2 good linebackers returning. Offensively, I don't know if you want to call it a coup, but Graham Harrell coming in to run the offense is pretty good. Card does have a strong arm. They have 2 good running backs and a good offensive line with experience. So, again, it's not a team that's bereft of talent. You just need Harrell and Card to click together. That offensive line that does have experience to kind of gel. And then the 2 good backs to get the run game going. And as you mentioned, Walters is going to identify himself and this team defensively. That's where it's going to be. Non-conference, Fresno, Virginia Tech, Syracuse. They go to Michigan. They host Ohio State. They're at Iowa. It's not an easy schedule.
No, it's not. You know, I want to just briefly revisit last year's season. They got beat pretty good by Michigan in the bowl game, in the Big Ten championship game, and then lose by 56 to LSU. But they had a couple of wins that were decent. The Illinois win and the Minnesota win, but I thought the schedule was pretty soft last year, Patrick. I thought it benefited them in terms of where they wound up. And again, you mentioned it. They've got a lot of transfers on the defensive side of the ball. If they can kind of buy into what Walters is selling from a defensive standpoint, they're not going to beat Ohio State probably at Ross-Ade. I just don't think they've got the offensive capability. Probably not going to beat Wisconsin in that spot as well. But I don't think that this team is going to be in bad shape long-term. Don't look at the short-term here with Ryan Walters. I think you got to go towards year 2. You mentioned it. When you've got to face, the only team they're missing this year is Penn State. When you look at the 4 best teams in the Big Ten for us, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Wisconsin, they play 3 of those teams. They got to go to Ann Arbor. So I don't think it's going to be an easy season, But you close out with Northwestern and Indiana, a couple of winnable games. And to me, the Fresno State game is an important one to start the season. This is a very winnable, easy, I shouldn't say easy, but a game you expect to be able to win on your home field. And then if they can, beat Syracuse, I'm telling you right now, for me, the goal, if you're a Purdue Boilermaker backer, is a bowl game this year.
Yeah, you got to get to 6 wins. And if you do, you go over 5.5. And by the way, DraftKings right now, Purdue, big guy, set at 5.5. Juiced up big time, 165 to the under. So again, if you think they're going to be bowl eligible, as Amal said, and I think that would be the goal. Totally agree with you. New regime. It's a free year. Kind of a change in philosophy with Walters defensively. I think you have an offensive coordinator that can open it up. I like Card. I totally agree with them all. Like them better in Plummer. So I think they got the better quarterback in the switch here with head coaches. And, 5.5, you get to 6, you get plus 145 on the juice at DraftKings.
I think it's two really inspired coordinator hires for especially for a program like Purdue where you are so limited with who can get into the school. I'm not going to hold what happened at West Virginia to Graham Harrell too hard. Like, it's still West Virginia where they're at with Neil Brown. Like, they're kind of a mess, and it's in disarray, so I can't hold that against him. Harrell's been long thought of as one of these guys from the Mike Leach tree in the air raid who's been able to come to these programs and inject a little bit of life and a little bit of offense. And on the other side, Kevin Crane, when I dug into him more, he comes over from Illinois. Illinois had the best scoring defense in the country last year. They were the third best total defense. I think it's two really inspiring hires to help navigate both the offense and defense for a young up-and-coming head coach in a situation that should be difficult for some. I think by hiring two guys that are creative like that, it's going to make his job a lot easier in the first year.
Guys, though, when you look at the schedule, you mentioned the 5.5 wins, Patrick. I think it's an optimistic feat to get to 6 wins, but that's the goal. I think realistically, this team is probably 5-7 and could be 4-8. When I go through the schedule, let's just go ahead and concede Ohio State, Michigan, and Wisconsin as potential losses. I expect them to win the 2 games in the back end against Northwestern and Indiana. But now, Minnesota, Nebraska, Illinois, Iowa, those are all games where I expect them to be slight to decent underdogs in those matchups. And then you've got to get the game against Fresno State. I don't think they're going to go on the road at Lane Stadium and win. So
margin slim.
Yeah, margin is slim to get to 6, but that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and really, I just told you, there's such juice on that over 5.5, so we can call it a true number of 5.
Yeah.
Now you'll have to pay juice if you want to go over the 5. You get juice if you want to go over the 5.5 over at DraftKings right now on Purdue. Be interesting. I don't think the expectations are there. Look, they just lost Brom. Brom's a name.
Yeah.
The pressure is on Brom at Louisville. There's no pressure on Walters at Purdue year 1. None.
I would agree with you guys, but you brought up a good point. Is Brom a bigger name than he really is, just like Graham Harrell? Like, these are two guys to me that are good coaches, decent coaches. They're not elite, but the way we sometimes talk about Graham Harrell from an offensive standpoint and Jeff Brom as a head coach, like, they've accomplished more than they really have.
Well, I mean, here's what I'll say about Harrell, and Dustin said it well. He was dealing with that buster at West Virginia and Neil Brown, who I'm not sure how he must have a big buyout, because being under the thumb of Neil Brown at West Virginia is not doing any favors to Graham Harrell.
Yeah, and for Brom, the pressure in Louisville, in that city, it goes Louisville Slugger, Papa John's, then the Brom family.
Well, and real quick, to Patrick's point on Neil Brown, his buyout, if fired before December 31st of 2024, is the full freight of $13 million.
Yeah, that is... Let's just say the expectations aren't sky high for your boy this year either. Interesting to see with Purdue. I would agree with you. I think probably the true number set at 5. So if you want to lay if you want to go over that 5.5, you're going to get a nice little number at plus 145.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.